Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to our detailed analysis of chapter 2, verse 260, which is talking about Ibrahim and when he asked Allah or said to Allah, Arini kayfa tuhyi al-mawta. Show me how you give life to al-mawta, to the dead, loosely translated. So if you haven't watched the first two videos, I encourage you to go back and watch the other two. We're going piece by piece in these videos, just taking little pieces of the verse and analyzing them, and at the end we're going to put it all together into an overall explanation. The next thing I want to look at in this verse is, let's read the verse again. This is 2:260. He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. And when Ibrahim said, my Lord, show me how you give life to al-mawta. And we talked about in the last video that perhaps al-mawta is more closely related to spiritually dead than physically dead. And we gave some reasons for that. Please watch that video to see that, inshallah. But then he says, قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ. He says, do you not believe, or have you not believed? قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. He said, certainly, but I want my heart to feel tranquil. قَالَ فَخُذْ أَرْبَعَةً مِنَ الطَّيْرِ فَصُرْهُنَّ إِلَيْكَ. He said, then take 4 birds and cause them to incline to you. فَصُرْهُنَّ إِلَيْكَ. So this word surhunna, sur is the order form, hunna means them, meaning the birds, cause them to do this, whatever this is. So in Arabic, when we say surtu ila al-amr, that I surtu to something, to some matter, that means miltu ilayhi, that means I inclined to it. So fasurhunna ilayk, make them inclined to you. ثُمَّ جَعَلَ عَلَى كُلِّ جَبَلٍ مِّنْهُنَّ جُزْءًا. Then place a portion of them on each mountain. And that doesn't necessarily mean to slaughter them. That's going to be another part of our analysis in an upcoming video. ثُمَّ دَعُهُنَّ يَأْتِينَكَ سَعْيًا. Then call them and they will come to you running. وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. And know that Allah is mighty and wise. So the part of the verse we want to analyze today is this last part, where after going through this exercise, he tells him, know, wa'alam, know that Allah is the mighty and the wise. So because it phrases it like this, it tells him to go through this exercise, and then once you go through this exercise, then know, right? I think, and Allah knows best, and we're going to compare this to the previous verse to show why I think this. I believe in Allah knows best that this is telling us that this is not something that happened for Ibrahim immediately in that moment. And if you think about that, that's logical, because if he's telling him to take these birds and cause them to incline to you, in other words, train them so they will come back to you when you call them, because in the end of the verse he says, ثُمَّ أُدْعُهُنْ, then call them and they will come to you. So you have to train them so they become familiar with you and they will come back to you when you call them. And know. So at the end of this training process, how long does this training process take? Allah knows best. It takes some time. It's not going to happen right in that immediate moment. And he's telling him, after you do this, and then in this case, you will know that Allah is mighty and wise. So that's a beautiful observation. And we're going to go to the previous verse to support this observation. But I want to comment on it first, because I think this is a really beautiful observation that we should think about in this story with Ibrahim, because he's not necessarily doing something for Ibrahim like right in front of him and showing him like this miraculous event to explain the answer to his question, because he said, show me how you give life to the dead. So Allah didn't take these birds and cause them to die and bring them to life right in front of Ibrahim, and then Ibrahim saw it with his eyes. No, rather what he did was he instructed him on an exercise or an experience that he can do for himself, to learn for himself. And that's why it says at the end, and know, meaning once you've done this, this is what you will know, this, you will have this knowledge that Allah is mighty and wise. So this verse, if you think about it like that, is very Zen. It's like going to a Zen master and you're asking the Zen master a question and you're saying, I want to understand life and death, or I want to understand how the dead are brought to life, or something of that nature. And the Zen master tells you, go and get a blade of grass and do this and do that, and you're like, what is he talking about, right? But once you do this, then you will know the answer to your question. So it's to me, this verse is a very spiritual, mystical kind of Zen verse when you think about it like that. And it perhaps tells us something about the way that Ibrahim was discovering things. Because if you look at other places in the Quran, and we're going to go to these in upcoming videos about this verse because they're relevant, you see him as a person who was observing the planets or the stars and the sun and the moon and deriving conclusions. You see that him being a very experiential person. He's having these experiences and he's observing things. So perhaps this verse, because also we're told in the Quran to follow his millah, the millah of Ibrahim, the way or the religion of Ibrahim. So perhaps this verse is showing us that those of us who are trying to seek knowledge and enlightenment should do so by going through these exercises, by going through these experiments, and we'll learn things like that. To support this point, let's go to the previous verse, which is 259. It's a lot longer verse, but let's read through it to see the difference. So 259 says, أَوْ كَالَّذِي مَرَّ عَلَى قَرْيَةٍ وَهِيَ خَاوِيَةٌ عَلَى عُرُوشِهَا, or like the one who passed by a town and it was fallen down upon its trellises, it was collapsed. قَالَ أَنَّا يُحْيِي هَذِهِ اللَّهُ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. He said, Anna, and I discussed this word in the previous video. He said, Anna, which is sometimes translated as how, but some scholars explain Anna as meaning how and where. But if you look at certain verses, this word Anna is almost like saying the natural means to bring something about are gone. So Anna, how, where, and in what way possibly could this be? So this is a different question than Ibrahim asked. Ibrahim said, Kayfa tuhyi al-mauta. How? He wants to know the howness of it. He didn't say Anna, almost like as a statement of, almost not disbelief in the sense of kufr, but almost like amazement or hard to believe that this would happen. He just wanted to understand how. So even the way that the questions are asked are different and the results are different. Anna yuhyi hadhihi Allahu ba'da mawtiha. How, where, in what way would Allah bring this to life after its death? فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ مِئَةَ عَامٍ ثُمَّ بَعَثَهُ. So Allah caused him to die for 100 years and then he brought him back. قَالَ كَمْ لَبِثْتَ. He said, how long did you stay? قَالَ لَبِثْتُ يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْضَ يَوْمٍ. He said, I stayed for a day or part of a day. قال بل لبثت 100 عام فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنه. He said, rather, you stayed for 100 years. So look at your food and drink, they have not decayed. وانظر إلى حمارك ولنجعلك آية للناس. And look at your donkey, and so in order that we can make you a sign for people. وانظر إلى العظام كيف ننشزها ثم نكسوها لحما. And look at the bones, how we erect them. ثم نكسوها لحما. Then we cover them with flesh. Okay, so first of all, before I read the last line of this verse, look at the detail, look at the type of experience that Allah took this person through, who said Anna, how, where, and in what way, versus the answer that Ibrahim got, who said Kayfa, just how. Look at the end of the verse. After he caused him to die for 100 years, raised him up, told him, look at this, look at that, right? At the end of all that, what does the verse say? فَلَمَّا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ. When it became clear to him, right? When it became clear to him, قَالَ أَعْلَمُ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. When it became clear to him, he said, I know that Allah has power over all things. When it became clear to him, he said, I know. So when did he say, I know? Is when it became clear to him, after he was taken through this in-depth experience. So Allah took him through that experience, right? Caused him to die, raised him up, told him, look at these different things. And then it became clear to him, and he said, I know now that Allah is mighty, or it has the ability over all things, or has power over all things. Look at the difference in the end of that verse and the verse with Ibrahim. In the verse with Ibrahim, it doesn't tell us that when it became clear to Ibrahim, he said, I know, right? It tells the verse tells Ibrahim, or Allah told Ibrahim, place a portion of them on each mountain and then call them and they will come to you running, wa'alam, and know, right? So perhaps because that's not something that would happen in that moment, like it wouldn't become clear to him and he wouldn't know that in that moment. Whereas the person who was caused to die for 100 years, once he was raised up and Allah showed him these different things, in that moment, then it becomes clear to him, right? So he says, A'lamu, I know. Whereas with Ibrahim, he's told to get these birds and to train them and to do these different things and know. He didn't say, now I know, right? So I think Allah knows best. If you compare it like that, that implies that Ibrahim would know after a time, meaning once he went through this experience. And Allah knows best. Inshallah, we'll continue this in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.